All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live stream. We are going to be taking a look at all kinds of wild stories. Uh, as always, thanks for joining us. We've got Trump announcing, of course, that he is totally ready to do that second stage of sanctions against Russia. Didn't know there were stages. Nobody told us that. And he's definitely not making it up as he goes along. Of course, the Trump National Defense Strategy has at least started to leak, and it reportedly doesn't really have us defending against China or Russia. Who knew? Could have sworn those guys were a threat. But yes, maybe they're just friends we haven't made yet. And of course, what we are doing, though, is allowing Russian, basically yielding most of Eastern Europe to Russia, including countries like Moldova. We're telling them, hey, listen, we're not going to help you, so you better just give Putin what he wants. Same with the Baltics. We're saying, listen, we're probably not going to defend you, so you should probably just give Putin what he wants. These are, of course, winning strategies known to, it's the art of the deal, right? And, of course, we would be remiss to not talk about the absolute insanity that is RFK Jr., right? So, I appreciate you guys as always, and you probably know the rules. Rules probably a little aggressive, but you guys know the deal. That we're gonna talk about a topic. Well, I'll answer your questions, and then we'll talk about another topic. And if you want to jump to the top of the line, so to speak, on getting your questions answered, you always just gotta drop them in chat, a super chat, or whatever. Yeah, exactly. Phase 2, 2 weeks, right? Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Seems like you guys are eager to address it. Let's talk about this sanctions thing. Okay, let's wait. Oh my gosh, I just put away my pencil. Use my pencil to like track when things happen. Uh, when things happen in different parts of the stream. Otherwise, I get confused when I edit it because you guys are like, "Oh, Paul must be really big. You must have an editor." Nah, dude, I don't have anybody. It's me and one other person on the team, which I like it that way. I think a lot of streamers they get, and I'm not big by any stretch of the imagination, but a lot of creators they're like, I'm gonna have a 15-person team, but then their content isn't any better, and they just pay a lot more people. And then when you pay more people, what you have to do is start making content that like gets views and is advertiser safe. And when you make advertiser safe content, I think you have to compromise your actual views and beliefs. And that's one thing that I'm not going to do, right? You guys tune in because you're going to get my real honest analysis. And, I don't pull any punches, man. I mean, you see, this month, you know how many offers from sponsors I've gotten? Zero. Zero. And that's okay. I don't mind because you guys have my back and I appreciate it. And for those of you that don't know, you can always drop into combatvetnews.com. I'll even throw it in chat, right? You can become a member. And the nice thing is it's self-hosted. So it's not even like Patreon, right? You're going to absolutely, this 100% gets you, let's see, we'll pin it. Boom. Yeah, Combat News, right? And you remember it goes to me and my one other team member, and supports us, right? Lets us do this whole operation ourselves. We don't need to bring in external sponsors or beg corporations to tell them, please, we'll make content that's safe for you. You know. So I appreciate you guys, right? And the only reason, again, we can do it is because you guys have my back. Okay. You want to talk about it? Thanks, Larry the Cable Guy. I appreciate you guys. Phase 2, 2 weeks. All right. All right, let's do it. President Trump says he's ready for phase 2 of his sanctions plan against Russia. But is there even a sanctions plan to speak of? Or is he just dropping sanctions based mostly on vibes? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So this has been what should be an optimistic story if it was a president who wasn't Donald Trump, because he's said that he is ready for phase 2 of Russia sanctions over the Ukraine conflict and over Putin's unwillingness to engage in meaningful peace talks. You might note that for all the president's efforts, Ukrainian President Zelensky has said he would happily meet with Vladimir Putin, literally like green eggs and ham. He'll meet him on a train. He'll meet him on a plane. He'll meet him on a plane. He'll meet him on a mountain. He'll meet him at a fountain. By contrast, Vladimir Putin has constantly made obviously preposterous excuses to not hold any kind of meaningful peace talks. Those excuses have ranged from, oh, before I have peace talks, I need Ukrainian forces to withdraw from all their fortified positions in the east, to, oh, Zelensky isn't even the real president of Ukraine. So it's fairly obvious to everybody, again, but President Trump, that Vladimir Putin is just stalling for time and playing games. And of course, President Trump happy to play along. And this so-called second phase of sanctioning Russia is right a part of it, because you might recall to yourselves, I don't recall President Trump rolling out a first phase of sanctioning Russia. And he says, listen, guys, look, I sanctioned India with 50% tariffs because they bought Russian oil. Now, you may note that these 50% tariffs are actually kind of inclusive to a bunch of other tariff plans, because essentially when the administration went to India and said, hey, like, why, let's do a trade deal, India said, why would we do a trade deal with you? You always renege on your trade deals anyway. It's a waste of time. And you can imagine Trump didn't like that. But, India is a pretty nationalist country and a pretty proud country, so they're really not open to this kind of bullying. In fact, again, someone like Modi, who's kind of a strong man adjacent leader, obviously democratically elected, isn't definitely not going to be seen as kowtowing to Trump the way European leaders seem willing to do. And Trump has said, Trump has literally said, he's like, listen, it cost hundreds of billions of dollars to Russia for him to hit India with secondary sanctions. He says, you call that no action? I haven't even done phase 2 or 3 yet. Now, here's what I want to point out. First off, this is the stock price of the Russian oil company over the last 12 months. And let's see if we can zoom in over the last month here. All right. Okay. It's going to be mad at me. That's fine. So as you can see, here's the stock price in August 30th, right? Here's August 22nd, right after the meeting between Trump and Putin went nowhere. Then here he is 2 weeks later, and you can see that basically to Gazprom, the Russian oil giant, there's no meaningful impact, right? So whatever these sanctions are doing, Gazprom, literally the Russian oil company, having their stock price absolutely not being touched by this sanction. And the reason is pretty clear, because look, India will continue buying Russian oil, right? That was 3 days ago. So essentially, it hasn't cost Russia anything because India has said, we just don't care. And well, that's not great, but exactly what we predicted would happen on this channel, because you can only renege and back away from negotiations so often before everyone just says there's no reason to negotiate with you at all. You may note that we did this to Canada, where Trump demanded a whole bunch of a renegotiation of whatever it was, the USMCA. Canada said, okay, they renegotiated it, and then Trump tariffed them again. He did the same thing to Mexico. He's done the same thing to China. No less than 3 different times he's announced that he's totally got a trade deal with China, only to walk away from it. You might also recall the U.S. has done a minerals deal with Ukraine that was supposed to allow Ukraine to purchase U.S. weapons, but in fact, the U.S. has actually stopped providing Ukraine with weapons of any kind, not even allowing them to purchase it. Instead, they forced the Europeans to make those purchases and then donate them to Ukraine. So all of these things collectively, right, produces an international community that says, listen, I'm gonna make a deal with someone whom I can, well, trust to follow through on their deals. And for India, that's been clear. It's countries like China and Russia who have, if nothing else, consistent leadership, right? Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, these are people who are credible because they are literally the same ruler for multiple decades, but also because when they make a deal, they tend to honor it on a long enough timeline, even if they are authoritarians. And this is kind of the problem, is that, again, Trump just loses credibility because you remember on August 22nd, Trump said, in 2 weeks, you'll know which way I'm going because I'm going to go one way or the other and they'll learn the hard way. This is in reference to the Vladimir Putin unwillingness, right? Trump said Putin needs to move concretely towards a peace deal in order, or else there'll be totally consequences. And here we are again, we're at the 2-week mark. Where are the consequences? As discussed, India is still buying Russian oil, so his little like secondary tariffs did fuck all. Gazprom trading right where it was. Yeah, so where's the peace through strength? Where's the coercion? Where's the forcing Putin to the table? None of it's happening, right? The 2 weeks meant nothing. And Trump will just say, well, give him 2 more weeks. Give him 2 more weeks, because that's the only thing he seems capable of doing. But as we've seen, he is unable to even recall what he's done from week to week. So it's really sort of silly to even put any credibility in what he says. Now, Scott Besson is, of course, rolling out the cope, saying that, guys, totally Russia's going to be on the brink of collapse and Putin's totally going to go to the negotiating table. But China is the major buyer of Russian energy exports. But more importantly, China is also one of the largest country providing Russia and the Russian public with consumer goods, industrial goods, military goods. None of those, and China has faced no sanctions, no tariffs, no consequences for it, because essentially the U.S. knows that if they were to hammer China, China would hammer them back, driving up inflation, which is something that would be kind of a disaster for Trump's economy, and the market will reflect that. So essentially, I don't know what else to tell you. This is cowardice, right? It's cowardice, and it's a failure of strategy. We've talked about this on this channel a lot, that the White House's current policy isn't a strategy. It's governing based on vibes. And as we just laid out, that you can't just simply say, well, this is the peace deal, the Russia peace negotiations, and over here is the China negotiations, because we just described they're totally bound up with each other. You can't sit there and go, okay, we have to punish China for its massive support to the Russian war machine, and at the same time try to negotiate a favorable trade deal with China. And, you know, for most U.S. policymakers, it's fairly simple. China is obviously and explicitly an enemy of the United States. They are supporting America's adversaries against America's allies, right? Not just in Ukraine, but in all of Western Europe. And so the administration simply being unable, completely impotent to say the magic words, which is China is an enemy of the United States and probably needs to be confronted or punished, or at least not actively enabled by the United States, is just a bridge too far, because it requires, to do that is sophisticated. It's challenging. It requires making trade-offs. It requires even some short-term pain. But these are all things the administration, or at least Trump himself, who, again, governs based on vibes instead of really thoughtful, deliberate policy, just lacks the ability to do. Anyway, guys, that is all right. Oh, cool. Oh, thank you. A huge thank you to Igor. Thanks for the 10, man. I really appreciate it. Yeah, people talk about Lindsey Graham's efforts to push like a Trump a sanction bill. But here's the thing: they're not a sanction bill. It's a bill to give Trump the right to sanction people. But as we've discussed, he currently has the ability to do a bunch of these crazy tariffs. Nobody's stopping him, certainly. And so why would you think that he would need authorization to sanction Russia? It's purely performative, right? This administration and Trump himself believes that he can do anything. That being president is the same thing as being a dictator. And that's not me being like Trump's a dictator. That's his own words. He says, quote, "I can do anything I want. I'm president of the United States." So the fact that Lindsey Graham is passing this, trying to push through this sanctioning law, like, sure, it's nice, but it's purely just kissing his ass. Telling him that, yeah, you're so strong. You could totally get him. Wow, you have all the power you need. Yeah. I mean, the problem is that, like, you have this, yeah, where Mark Gauci, Trump thinks he's on TV, he does his thing, and it's someone else's job to edit it. Yeah, it's totally. He's just living a TV world, and he's really good at it, right? Like, he says shit, and then he reverses it, and everybody talks about the thing he says. Like, he dominates the news cycle, but you can't. Like, it's like playing chess. If you played chess the way Trump plays chess, where he just wants nothing but stunning moves, he wants nothing but to keep the commentators going, whoa, I can't believe he put his king there. It's like, you can't play chess that way. You play chess through a steady application of a strategy over time that flexes based on your opponent's actions. And that's how China operates. That's how Vladimir Putin in Russia operates. You don't even need a brilliant strategy as much as you need one that you know is going to be effective. So it's just, yeah, it's just not a way. You can't govern a country that way. I mean, you can. It just won't be governed well. Other people are like, oh, the sky is not falling. It's like, dude, people who say those things, who believe that, like, I mean, we're gonna find out, right? We're gonna find out. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. Like, save your money, but like, the problem is the sky isn't falling until you get crushed underneath it, right? Like, the sky looks like it's in the sky until it's not. Yeah, seeing cabinet members like kiss his ass is pretty funny. You should be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. It's like, dude, you have to make peace first to do it. Yeah, but the Congress going along with it is crazy. Like, the only person who appears to have any discernible like actual value is Thomas Massie. Like, Thomas Massie, the Republican from Kentucky, is a better Democrat than the entire Democratic Party. Yeah, I mean, it's, again, it's irreparable damage to America's reputation, and that's the core problem. Is that you have a reputation. Like, how many times do you get to cheat on your spouse? The answer is zero, right? Before you've destroyed your trust. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, you could be a reliable partner for 30 years, but if you cheat once, you're a cheater. And that's true of being a security partner. So, the U.S. can say, listen, when we sign an agreement with the U.S., a treaty from the U.S. that will defend you is as good as gold. And again, we signed the Budapest Memorandum that said that Ukraine's territorial integrity was inviolable. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't Trump that broke that. It was Obama who sort of like loosely condemned it and kind of sort of helped Ukraine and was like, well, that's good enough. But even to a lesser extent, President Biden, who at least, took significant action in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, at least was seen as honoring the spirit of that treaty. But now to go fuck them and like fuck those guys, and to do a bunch of other actions around not supporting our European allies and our Baltic countries, the problem you run into is that every other person who has a treaty with the United States that says that we'll come to your aid in a time of crisis is looking at that and going, I think this is as worthless as toilet paper, right? Again, it used to be a treaty with the U.S. Part of the reason people wanted those treaties with the U.S. is because we were both big and credible, right? We had a large military and we were shown as willing to use it, even when it was a tough fight, right? And the fact that now people are saying, hey, I don't think the U.S. military is willing to jump in to aid us in the event of a conflict, even though they're bound by treaty to do so, means that every one of those treaties is going to be seen as, if not worthless, not that valuable. It's like, imagine buying the nicest, the strongest lock for your front door, but there's a 30% chance it's just going to come unlocked at any given time, depending on who's in office. Well, you'd be like, hey, I'd rather have a mediocre lock that is locked all of the time. All right. And so we're sort of getting to this, but should we talk about the emerging national defense strategy? Let's do it. I guess I should pray. All right, let's talk about it. President Trump's national defense strategy, how he plans to protect the entire country with the military, has leaked. And according to the first look, it's, well, pretty bad. Unless, of course, you think, shoot, man, that doesn't make any sense. Does that make any sense? This intro, my intros are have been a mess lately. I blame in part because my 2-month-old was up like really, really, really. It was just like his sleep cycle's been a mess. Okay. Let's try this again. Okay. The Trump administration's national security strategy has leaked. This document guides the entire U.S. military and how it protects the country. But protects it from what exactly? Well, it's pretty shocking if you see what I'm talking about. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Slap that subscribe. Let's talk about it. Okay, so Pentagon defense strategy has leaked to Politico, right? This recently, though, it's the final draft. It was on the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth's desk last week. But the actual document itself contains some really strange reimagining of what it means to be the leader of the free world. Because, well, we've decided that the military is better used to be deployed here in the United States. That's right. See, the national defense strategy that has been consistent through Democratic and Republican administrations over the last 15 years, including President Trump's own first term, identified China as America's greatest rival, followed in most cases by Russia, and then other sort of state sponsor of terrorism type folks like Iran, and of course, rogue nations like North Korea, who, again, are sort of like seen as China proxies. So this new strategy, though, no kidding, places domestic and regional missions above countering Beijing and Moscow. So essentially telling the U.S. military that when you look at how to train your troops or how to purchase new equipment, you should first ask yourself, how can we use this on Americans? Yeah, for realsies. They're like, well, the military's primary job is going to be border security. But again, the takeaway from this is look at what domestic missions mean to this administration, right? As you can see, they've deployed the military to the southern border, giving him large authority to arrest anyone they find. They've also, of course, Trump has said he wants to deploy the U.S. military to cities like Chicago. He has deployed it to Washington, D.C. and L.A. So this should tell you that, again, when people say, hey, is Trump in the pocket of China and Moscow? The answer seems to be yes. And the other insane part of this is that the National Defense Strategy was reportedly written by Elbridge Colby, the Pentagon's policy chief, right? And of course, the National Defense Strategy is a policy document. And Elbridge Colby claimed and has claimed for years that he is a China hawk. He says, listen, the U.S., and it's not a dumb take, right? His take, at least before this administration, was saying, listen, China is such a large emerging global threat that the U.S. needs to prioritize countering Chinese influence and may not be able to become the world police everywhere all of the time, which is actually a very, very reasonable stance. Now, up until, again, like 4 months ago, this meant that Colby was an advocate for saying, listen, what's sometimes called great power politics, looking and saying, where can the U.S. military contain Chinese influence? And that might mean that our allies in Europe and in other regional areas might need to lead the fight against, like, terrorists and insurgents like the ISIS of the world or Islamists in Niger, right? That sort of mission can't dominate, or God forbid, even Iran is striking Israel with drones, that maybe our air defenses would be better spent somewhere else. And that's, again, like a real policy position. But the fact that this guy either was instructed to or sort of dropped the mask and said, actually, guys, maybe we should have we considered just letting China win? Maybe we should just let China own our allies in the Pacific. Maybe just like we should let Russia dominate Eastern Europe. Maybe we don't need to have all these pesky friends, right? And this is, of course, preposterous, given that, again, even if you pretend like you're going to just yield to China and yield to Russia, that's not going to magically make them your friend. Instead, what it's going to do is validate Russia and China's aggression. And make no mistake, Russia and China engage in aggression against the United States. Like, don't kid yourselves. You don't need to do much more than Google Russian hackers and see just how widespread Russian efforts to hack and leak and obtain classified U.S. information is, to steal and blackmail U.S. institutions. Of course, you can also Google the bipartisan Senate report on Russian interference in the 2016 election. And the reason you should treat that as credible is because it was authored by current Secretary of State Marco Rubio. So it's not some Democratic hoax to say that Russia systematically and in sweeping fashion attempted to interfere in U.S. politics, right? So the fact that despite all of these actions by Russia and China that are hostile to the United States, right? Notably, China also major provider and purveyor of fentanyl components, something that they've never stopped doing. Despite promising and pinky promising every administration that they were going to do something about it. Despite all these hostile actions, the administration still says, well, maybe we should just focus on beating up protesters. I'm like, is this it? Is this what our $1 trillion military is going to be doing? Right? While our allies just get either cooked or worse, go, listen, maybe we should just figure out a way to give China what they want so they leave us alone. And we're seeing these actions already kind of take place, right? Allies are basically, it says allies are worried. Allies are in full fucking panic mode, okay? The Pentagon is already nuked their Baltic Security Initiative, hundreds of millions of dollars a year for Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia to help build up their military to, counter, I don't know, Russia. And of course, you also have a lot of other allies, like, for example, South Korea, who Trump has said he may not defend in the event of incursion by the North. Right now, Trump, again, has said different things at different times, but this is the problem, is that Trump says a lot of things, but what do his actions say? And his actions say, good luck, U.S. allies. You guys are going to be on your own. All right, hope you guys appreciated that uplifting video. Yeah. Okay, Time says USA using Ukraine as a strategy to fight Russia like we used the Taliban. Well, one, we didn't. That's not how that worked. What we did is we aided mujahideen groups, a variety of them, including a lot of secular groups, and then they, once they defeated the Soviets, started to do a ton of infighting. And instead of the U.S. Intervening diplomatically to help say, listen, let's try to establish a stable government here. Let's get you guys to not fight. The U.S. followed a policy of doing fuck all in Afghanistan. And in this incredibly chaotic environment, the only people who were literally militant enough to take it over were the Taliban, right? The Taliban were just religious extremists. So people love to be like, oh, the Taliban, the U.S. funded the Taliban to kill the Soviets. Like, nah, dude. Like, the Taliban killed a lot of mujahideen commanders and mujahideen groups to take power. But this isn't to say the U.S. didn't screw it all up. Right? We pumped the country pumped Afghanistan full of weapons. We trained a bunch of people how to fight. They used it on each other. They learned how to fight with each other. But again, it's a little reductive to say that we caused the rise of the Taliban. We definitely created the conditions that enabled the Taliban to rise. But the biggest difference is that there is a safe, stable, democratic Ukrainian government that we are supporting. We are supporting a sovereign state's recognized government, particularly one that aligns with our values of things like the people of Ukraine should decide who is in charge of Ukraine. The law should determine what happens to people, not the will of a dictator, right? Those are the things that sort of define the Western system, in contrast to the Russian system, in which Vladimir Putin's will and desires are the law. So, yeah. Again, it's a pretty bad misnomer, right? To say that, oh, Ukraine is like the Taliban, and that's some like Russian propaganda stuff, right? Yeah, I mean, it's me, man. I mean, so it's me, man says Trump hates rules and laws and frankly hates the United States, or at least everything we stand for or did stand for. And this is one of the core issues. And this isn't actually a Trump issue, I think. So when you have a country, okay, so there's a fundamental problem, is that when you have a country of vast inequality, like inequality that passes a certain like level, the people that are richest get to run the country on like a cultural level first. And what seems to have happened is that like money and getting money became the only cultural value, right? It used to be that the US president was expected to have served in the military, right? Because that was really important, to be able to be like, hey, you risk your life for the country in uniform on some level. And then they said, okay, it's also important that you spend some time in government service, right? As a governor, as a state representative, right? You have this career of sort of governing, and doesn't mean you can't work in the private sector, but it used to be this sense of a complete American was defined not just by making a shitload of money, but then at some point we decided that being an American citizen was of secondary importance. This became a country of the taxpayers. And you hear it in the rhetoric, right? And, Trump is the taxpayer president, or at least because he basically grades how much he looks out for you based on how many taxes you pay. The Big Beautiful Bill makes that clear, that the poorest people who pay basically nothing in taxes, get screwed, whereas the people who pay the most taxes get the most benefits, right? But here's the problem: is that in like that only makes sense if you have only one value, and that value is the acquisition of money. If you believe, for example, that America has a mandate to do anything for all of its citizens, that if you believe that America has a mandate to run a government that adheres to certain values like those outlined in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, all those things are a problem, right? And we already see it, right? Some of them are just a feature. If you live in a world where the average person could never, ever win a court case, even a false court case against a wealthy individual or corporation, right? Then if you can't have free speech if you say something like, I think it's bad that Facebook allows Russian propaganda. And then Facebook sues me, says that's defamation. We're going to sue you and you're going to have to beat us in court. And, I can't afford to beat Facebook in court, right? You can't afford to beat Facebook in court. And so you don't have freedom of speech, right? Because if you engage in speech that's targeted by the wrong person, or wrong corporation, and that corporation is rich enough that you don't have a chance to beat them in court, even if you're right, then the principle of free speech or free press just vanishes. Do you see what I mean? Time, yeah, it's a good analogy, right? The richest people in the country are in some ways like a crop. Yeah, that's a good analogy, right? He compares the wealthiest like people, and we're using people, but think of them as like the wealthiest American companies, that they are the harvest of this field that is America, right? It's the soil, it's the wind, it's the water, it's the rain, and it all contributes. And from that emerge these small and large, highly productive companies and technologies, and when that happens, right, the idea is that some of that gets to get reharvested and replanted as seeds for the next generation, right? That's what these taxes are. So again, Elon Musk builds an awesome car company, and it has to pay some taxes on its profits so that those profits can go and provide subsidies for the next generation of, whatever comes after electric vehicles, right? Just like Tesla got a bunch of subsidies to sell its cars, right? And that's how the American capitalist system works, the way it works here in the United States, or how it kind of has done so over the last, 40 years. Saga White says, yeah, the Constitution guarantees only free speech protection from the government. Companies can do whatever they want. Right. And that's why I talk about the principles of the Constitution, because, there is the exact wording of the Bill of Rights, but there is a deeper meaning, right? And some of it can even be read in, right? So it says Congress shall make no law respecting freedom of speech, freedom of the press, right of people in their persons and possessions. But at the end of the day, saying, hey, if, is the law that says is libel law, is saying you can sue someone for libel, and even if you're wrong, they still have to pay their legal fees. Like, isn't that sort of respecting? That's making a law abridging freedom of speech, right? Like, yeah, the exact way that law is written impacts freedom of speech. So you have to use this principle if every American is in possession of free speech, and use that to guide the way the laws and structure are written. So if the government says, hey, listen, if you're rich enough, you can sue every one of your critics into oblivion, and that's okay, then the government has made a law abridging free speech, haven't they? Right. Just like you could say a corporation can sue you for defamation. Well, the government passed a law that says that. But I can't defame my toaster. I could tell you that my toaster is Satan incarnate. I could tell you that my toaster causes cancer. But it doesn't matter. The toaster doesn't exist. It's not real. It can't sue me. It can't be an entity in court. But our laws have said a corporation can. And that doesn't mean that I think corporations should have no rights in court. It doesn't even mean that I think a corporation should be unable to like defend itself reputationally in court. But when you sit there and go, oh, well, the Constitution says that only the US government can't make laws about free speech. It's like, well, they do when they decide how and who can regulate it. Yeah, but again, corporations have the same right as a person. Even that's kind of like a fig leaf, because like Mark Zuckerberg owns 51% of Facebook, meaning that defaming Meta and defaming Mark Zuckerberg are are like one and the same. So if I say things like, oh, it's messed up that Facebook kowtows to authoritarians and Russians and misinformation and censors, then well, could Mark Zuckerberg be like, well, the company I own, you said they do these bad things, so I'm going to sue you? Like even that's kind of a red herring. Again, this is a fundamental wealth inequality problem. When you have someone who is Mark Zuckerberg wealthy and controls things, and I'm using him as an example because he's kind of a weirdo, but he's a publicly facing weirdo. But again, you replace it with Elon Musk and Twitter, right? Where when you have individuals who can buy entire media ecosystems, you see how you start to warp, it's like the way when an object gets big enough, it starts to warp time itself. When people get wealthy enough that they can own entire media ecosystems, it begins to warp the very nature of free speech, right? Because free speech only kind of works when people have like some sort of egalitarian access to information. It can't occur when you start to like control things at that scale. So speaking of mis and disinformation, should we talk about the US bailing on its efforts to even combat Russian disinformation? All right, let me pull it up. The Trump administration is bailing on efforts to protect its allies from Russian information and hybrid warfare. Just why is Europe in panic and Vladimir Putin loving it? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about what appears to be Vladimir Putin's next target in Europe. So this is about Russia ramping up its disinformation campaign against Moldova. Now, we know that in the last Moldovan election, that was found to have had widespread interference by Russia. In fact, a dual citizen in the last election ran on what appeared to be a massively corrupt campaign orchestrated by Russia. So much so that Russia was, or this guy's campaign was actively bribing rural Moldovans to simply vote for him. They found that, of course, his viral social media campaign was almost entirely engineered by bots and was funded entirely by Moscow. And so it was obvious, again, last year that the Moldovans were the target of Russia's next influence operation. And we can see on the map here, let's pull up a little map of of Moldova. You can see that geographically, it makes perfect sense that it's going to be Moscow's next target because, well, you can see that here is Ukraine. Literally, Russian forces occupy as far south as right here. So it's just an easy hop, skip, and a jump over to Moldova. And it's also worth noting that the breakaway region, quote unquote, of Transnistria is already a Russian-dominated government or pseudo-government. And this level of Russian, I don't know what to call it, well, there you go. A document written in 2021 by Russia's FSB titled, quote, Strategic Objectives of the Russian Federation in the Republic of Moldova sets out a 10-year plan to destabilize the country using energy blackmail. This is to say, co-opting its power facilities and its political elite to make them favorable to Russia and the Russian Orthodox Church. And Russia was like, no, this leaked plan with FSB branding in FSB language was totally fake. Again, in 2023, Russia canceled a 2012 decree in which they affirmed Moldovan sovereignty, which is weird for a country that you don't want to take over. And, right, in, of course, 2023, the Moldovan caught a Russian spy ring literally on the rooftop of the Russian embassy in Moldova's capital. So the Moldovan, so this whole thing is obviously, it's fairly obvious that Russia has designs on Moldova. And so the U.S., of course, being a defender of democracy and valuing our allies, because, well, frankly, our allies are pretty essential to America's prosperity and security, stands up for Moldova, right? And what do? Well, we counter Russia's mis- and disinformation attempts with our own free information environment, right? So that means that making sure that independent Moldovan reporting, right, gets funded by grants from the Department of State and USAID. For example, USAID also countered that Russian energy blackmail by literally opening, funding, and constructing our own Moldovan power plants that Russia was unable to get used to, again, blackmail Moldova with high electricity prices. All of these things, right? Radio Free Europe, Voice of America, broadcasting in Moldovan languages. All of these things are counterbalances, counterpoints to Putin's efforts. And the key, right, the reason they work so well is because they provide true value, right? They don't rely on lies, they rely on truth. And again, in general, the Moldovan public, Moldovan voters, they say, listen, I trust these information, these sources, because I see them report true facts, whether it's beneficial or a detraction from, this political party or that political party. Sometimes even U.S. funded outlets are critical of U.S. policy or cover bad news about U.S. policy or negative stories about U.S. policy. And that raises your credibility tremendously, right? The same way if you had a coach that was like, hey, man, you're doing X really well, but you're doing Y really badly. You would trust that coach way more than you would trust a coach who only says, you're doing great, versus a coach who says, actually, everything you do is terrible, right? At some point you go, I'm not going to listen to this guy. So that's been the U.S. sort of counterweight strategy in Moldova. Well, I say was because, well, the U.S. has simply said, why don't we just stop, right? And of course, Russia has said, wow, what perfect timing, America, because as you're stopping your efforts to support the Moldovans, right, which you may note that, again, a lot of those grants coming from USAID, which was destroyed by Elon Musk, which is kind of weird because there's also a lot of credible reports about Elon Musk being in frequent contact with Vladimir Putin. And even Vladimir Putin reportedly offering significant, there you go, being offered significant assistance in his space program by Russia. It's pretty crazy, right? It's pretty crazy how Elon Musk just accidentally served Russian interests perfectly, timed perfectly, because one of the things that has emerged in the last year is a Russian disinformation campaign against Moldova that is unbelievably ramped up in scale, right? According to, again, this NewsGuard, there have been no less than 34 stories directed at, sort of pushed by Russian-linked accounts into Moldova in the last 12 months, in the first 3 months of the year. Last year, there were 0 detected false stories pushed by these same Russian bot networks. And what are they? Well, they're pretty easy. to detect. Here's the top 5 in terms of how much engagement they got. Top story was Fox News reports that Moldova's government sold 50,000 hectares of land to investment company BlackRock. Now, again, what makes this story great is that it borrows the credibility of a recognized outlet. It depicts a large but not preposterous scheme, and of course, it has a real villain that really does buy land and investments, but BlackRock doesn't buy land in Moldova. Next biggest story, again, same thing. The BBC reports 42% of absentee ballots in the 2024 Moldovan elections were cast by dead people, right? Again, reducing Moldovan credibility in the electoral system. Then reducing, pushing a narrative of corruption against the Moldovan president, Maria Sandu, right? Vogue, again, borrowing credibility of a real outlet, reported that Maria Sandu ranks 6th in heads of state with the most expensive wardrobes. Maria Sandu called the most corrupt European leader by The Economist, which is truly brilliant given that Vladimir Putin is also a European leader. And E! News reporting that a planned visit to Moldova by 3 Hollywood stars was canceled because USAID funding was pulled, which is interesting, right? You can see, again, this USAID is a money laundering operation. That's also something we heard from Vladimir Musk, from Vladimir Putin's bestie, Elon Musk. And again, what I want to point out is that when people are like, but Elon said he found huge criminal enterprises. Well, Elon Musk, who has no experience in government and whose employees averaged aged about 22, said that they were sure they found criminal corruption inside USAID. But the part where they're charged with a crime, you notice how nobody got charged with a crime for any of the systematic corruption that Elon was sure he found. That's because there wasn't any. There was no real evidence. Whenever anybody sort of tried to peel back the evidence, they found that it was just regular accounting in a government database written in code that the 22-year-olds didn't understand, because these government databases, in most cases, were engineered around the time those kids were born. So, again, you notice that you just hear a lot of these narratives sound familiar to all of us, right? Again, USAID is corrupt and a money laundering operation. That sounds familiar, right? Your leader is corrupt and on the payroll of large companies. Absentee ballots, fake dead people. All these sound like narratives that, well, the Republican Party pushed prior to the U.S. election this past year. Remember? Sound familiar, right? A stolen election in 2020, right? Joe Biden and his son Hunter, unbelievably corrupt, impossibly corrupted, right? And of course, Hollywood stars on the payroll, everyone on the payroll of USAID. So you can see Russia pushing these narratives, right, on Moldova, and the U.S. simply bailing on it. But it's not just Moldova that we're bailing on, right? You can see there's also some preposterous ones, right? I don't even know if YouTube would let me repeat that story aloud, but just sort of just weird stuff, right? Again, kind of sort of targeting this wokeification. They're like, oh, Maya Sandu is so woke. She's, and positioning Russia, again, as this this defender of conservative, true Russian values. That's a really classic one, which, again, is worth noting that, arguing that Moldova is getting wokeified or whatever is already pretty dumb. But you can also see what's troubling, what's really worrying, and should worry all of us, is that Russia is getting better at this. You can see here that they've generated an AI podcast host or an AI news host that, again, is promoting these. So what used to be pretty cringe stuff, you would see these badly written Russian translated posts just run through Google Translate. You don't have that anymore. You have excellent, highly polished AI-generated content that feels real and credible to viewers. And that's the thing. It's culturally aligned. It uses phrases and euphemisms that are super familiar to a native speaker, and it uses, again, legitimate looking creators. So this is really scary stuff. And the fact the US is doing, like, even its cringy efforts, right? Like, the US is not putting out stuff like this. It's not even really enabling, like, it might be enabling some true creators to try to push back, but we're not even doing that, right? We're not even doing our regular pushback on this sort of thing. But what's more troubling, again, is that we're also bailing on our allies in the Baltics, right? So the Baltic states, right, are also being subject to this. And as we've talked about, the Baltics are having their funding also cut. Right? And this is being a very nice headline by the AP, saying European countries near Russia puzzled by U.S. plans to cut defense spending. And it's not so much puzzled as it is panicked. Panicked is the word you're looking for. And this security assistance, right? One, you know, the popular narrative by the right, by the American right going into this election was that, well, it's NATO's fault. We have to defend NATO, but, you know, we don't have an obligation to defend countries outside of NATO. Well, apparently we don't have an obligation to defend NATO countries either. Funding under the Baltic Security Initiative, which finances weapons purchased by countries on NATO's eastern flank, like the Baltics, is being pulled. And here's the thing. Like, President Trump says, hey, our plan is to make sure Europe takes responsibility for its own defense. But it's just like, it's like a kid, right? Your kid's 18, you go, listen, I want them to take responsibility for their own finances. Well, what's the way you would do it? You know, what's the smart way to do it? Probably to give them gradually increasing responsibilities. That's what my parents did to me. They said, listen, okay, you want a car? All right, great. We'll teach you to drive on ours, but then, and, you know, we'll help you get to work, but you got to save up and you got to buy your own car. And then once you do that, you know, we'll help you pay for the insurance and the gas. And then they go, okay, well, like, once you do that, you go, okay, let's talk about maybe you are going to pay your own cell phone bill. And then we'll talk about you know, what it means to pay your own rent and how you do that. And it was gradual over time, right? That's how these kind of transitions, when you take responsibility for yourself, go. And it's no different in a country, because remember, if you're the Baltics and you're used to saying, the US saying, hey, listen, we can fund your we can help you buy these weapons. We will literally fund you buying US weapons. And then you suddenly go, okay, well, we're going to pull this. You go, hey, I'm going to give you 3 years of warning, right? So you say, listen, we're going to help you find new contractors that you can purchase from. We're going to give you time to pass laws to maybe raise your taxes or come up with some other sort of revenue generation mechanism to purchase these weapons yourselves. We're going to do everything we can to sort of transition you towards a more independent posture, if that's your goal, which, again, given that the Baltics are pretty important NATO allies and sort of symbols for the U.S. commitment to defend the rest of NATO, and the fact that we're talking about not even billions of dollars, but just hundreds of millions of dollars, like literal fucking peanuts by U.S. tax standards. But if that's your goal, you do it gradually, right? And so if you want somebody, let's say your goal was to fuck your kid and make sure they have no chance of thriving on their own or standing up and defending themselves. Let's say you wanted to make them as weak and failure prone as possible. What would you do? Well, what you would do is get them totally dependent on you for everything, right? And then it'd be the equivalent of my parents saying, don't worry about the car. We'll take care of everything related to a car. You don't have to think about anything. We'll give you a card for gas. We'll put you on our insurance. You won't have to pay it. You won't have to do your cell phone. And then the day you turn 18, you kick them out and you cancel everything. So they not only do they not have the skill set to do it, but they literally don't even know where to go to do these things. They have no clue. That's how you screw somebody. And so that's what we're doing to the Baltics right now, right? Zero notice, absolutely kicking them to the curb, making them as weak and vulnerable as humanly possible, which again is pretty weird for somebody who says, no, we're for Mr. Peace through strength. The timing is like so perfect that, you know, the actions, if you throw out the president's words and if you assume the president just says whatever fucking thing he wants and you judge by their actions, these actions are indistinguishable from withdrawing support and giving Russia every single thing they've wanted for the last 15 years. All right. All right, guys. Shout out to all the Moldovan flags. That's kind of sick. I love that. Yeah, Ahsoka White talking about Germany. Listen, Germany has, and we've talked about this on this channel a lot. Germany has like less than 100,000 active duty troops. And the Europeans, right? Like they have definitely underinvested for decades in their defense industry. And yes, they have been told since the Obama era that they have to be prepared to stand up on their own. But the Europeans correctly identified this was not that credible. And again, I'm not like, don't do it. But the Trump administration has 4+ years to do this, right? So like, if you say, listen, it's going to be 3 years, why not? You're in power for 3 years. Be like, listen, 3 years from now, that's going to be the final year of this assistance. Or the assistance is going to titrate down. It's going to get halved and then canceled, right? There's so many options to do this that are equally tough, love. Well, they're not equally tough love. That are give Moldova the opportunity, or the Baltics for the opportunity to transition. Same with this, by the way, this operation campaign. You know, the U.S. could sit there and go, listen, again, I am somebody who says, listen, you know, the U.S. has large amounts of debt, and the U.S. can sit there and go, listen, the U.S. is going to have to start making some hard choices about what we spend and where, and we're going to get our budget under control because this level of spending is unhinged. And they say, okay, you go to the Western Europeans, you go, listen, we are going to figure out a way to hand you the keys to this Moldova counter-influence operation, right? But again, you go, okay, you guys, we're not going to do Radio Free Liberty, Radio Europe in Moldova. We need you guys to take it over. Here's everything we know about how to run it, right? And you could literally tell them to take it over. Or you could say, listen, hey, France, Europe, your intelligence agencies, your Department of State, here, let's get everyone in the same room, and you guys can fund your own program that does the same thing. And we'll help you build it up. And once it's up and running, then we'll shut down Radio Europe, Radio Free Liberty, right? Same with pick your poison, right? Same with the power plant. They say, listen, here, we're the US, we're big, we're strong, we're gonna help you guys set up an office, and we're gonna like encourage you to fund it. We're gonna find some funding to help you guys, like encourage you to fund it yourselves, and then we're gonna pass it off to you. You know, the US can even run it and just say, listen, the Europeans have to provide something into this fund, right? There's all sorts of ways to do this that don't involve massive costs to the United States. But the catch is you got to be willing to do it, right? And again, the ways in which this screws, like it pointlessly screws them. Again, it's the equivalent of saying, I want my kid to stand on my own. So on their 18th birthday, I cut them off from every single thing and told them to go, told them good luck. Like for every kid that like figures it out, there's going to be 3 or 4 or 5 that just end up hopeless, right? Don't know where to go, don't know what to do, have to learn everything on their own. Yeah. Yeah. And Time points out, yeah, the U.S. dollar right changes slower than other countries. It's much more stable, et cetera, et cetera. But again, you know, and that's part of the reason the U.S. dollar is so stable is because we have so many allies that are sort of part of this U.S. free trade system. It's what makes the U.S. so powerful is that throughout history, almost every other country is extractive. They march their troops into foreign lands, neighboring lands. They conquer the villages and towns and cities, and they say, you will pay us in tribute. The U.S. says, we don't want anything from you. We are part of an alliance system. We are friends. And what the U.S. gains from this, from being friends with Europe and France and the Baltics, is what we gain is our military gets stronger. We gain an economy of scale in terms of our weapons purchases, right? It's easier to build an F-35 when there are 27 countries putting money into the pot, right? And guaranteeing an order. And you also have this trade economy of scale that says, listen, the U.S., like Estonian companies want to sell things in the United States, the U.S. markets, right? And the U.S. market benefits from access to cheap Estonian goods. So everybody wins, and that's it. And they're like, guess what? If you want to buy and sell in the U.S., you have to use U.S. dollars to do it. And that's not like a condition we impose. That's just logic. You say if you want to sell things in the U.S., American buyers will use dollars, and you'll use dollars to repatriate it, and the dollar becomes more and more of the world's norm currency. And that, right, enables the U.S. to take out loans against it because it's so strong and stable. So, again, that's one of the reasons why people are like, oh, we're getting ripped off by Estonia. It's like, nah, dude, nah, we're not getting ripped off by Estonia. All right. Time talking about the Fed. Yeah, it's true. But look at the Russian central bank. Russia's another G7 economy. Like, it's a large economy. Okay. It's a top 25 economy still. And their central bank has rates that are way higher. Right. The average central bank cannot do the things that the Fed does. It's hard. It's hard to overstate how globally stable the U.S. currency is. And yeah, and it's true. Us having an independent, highly trusted, non-political Federal Reserve is a huge part of that. True. Estonia is part of the Euro currency zone. Yep. All right. All right, we got one more story we got to talk about. And that is Secretary of Health RFK. Let's get into it. Secretary of Health RFK Jr. went full anti-vax and is causing absolute panic, even in Trump's own CDC appointees. But just how does Mr. Brainworm get it so wrong? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Hit that subscribe button. So this is I think, story that's pretty important to talk about. And not just because my wife is a physician, but when every single, essentially, public health employee is saying you should worry, that's a clue. It's called a clue. But let's talk about what's going on here. One, RFK Jr., who, for the record, is a lawyer and has no experience in research or medicine and is not a doctor, has said he's going to answer what's causing autism this month, which is crazy given the fact that 20 years of research taking place across the globe have concluded that the autism is a confluence of a number of factors, most of which are genetic. So it's pretty crazy that he has access to secret data that will give him the answer on the cause of autism. And of course, public health officials that have said, hey, man, we already have research. Well, they've been kicked to the curb, particularly those who say that, hey, man, vaccines don't cause autism. And as a result, there's no one left except for him to say this stuff. And in a recent hearing, he really doubled down on this insanity, right? But also, in classic scientific method fashion, Kennedy out there told President Trump in a cabinet meeting that he was going to find them out in a month, but the research is still being funded. In fact, he's planning to spend $50 million over the next 2 or 3 years on what he calls an autism data science initiative. But he says we already know what the answers are. We already know what we're going to find, which for those of you that know anything about the scientific method, you may know that's not how it works. You actually have a hypothesis and then you test it with research. You don't decide what the conclusion is and then conduct the research. That is just justification. You know, and again, magical thinking. If you're a defender of the West, you can't really argue that this is defending the West here. And this is, of course, Kennedy has appointed a bunch of anti-vaxxers to his his vaccine panels, and of course ousted any of the directors who have said anything like, I don't know, man, maybe vaccines prevent disease and are much, 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 much safer than the diseases they prevent. Now, we got to break some of this stuff down because it's really important, okay? And what I want to understand, what I want you guys to take a look at here is the things he says and why we know they're wrong. Because if you are somebody that follows, like, maybe you don't understand foreign policy and maybe you don't understand, like, legal stuff, this is exactly how the president conducts, or the president and his appointees conduct everything. They take evidence-based, coherent, verified, researched conclusions, things that are known, and says they must be wrong because they are so thoroughly researched. And let me show you what I mean by COVID-19, right? So one, he says, oh, we're not going to take away anybody's vaccines. And the reality is that Kennedy has said repeatedly, actually, that the COVID vaccine killed more people than the virus, right? Let's see if I can give you the exact date of the quote here. So, but this is like, yeah, it just, RFK claimed mRNA vaccines killed more people than COVID itself, which is absolutely insane and truly one of the most preposterous things I've heard. But how do we know that that is not true? Well, the answer is, right, that the COVID vaccine, right, saved a ton of lives during COVID. But what exactly is the statistics, right? Here's the statistics. And we're using hospitalization rate, right? Because, you know, a lot of people can lie about, oh, well, I didn't get that sick from COVID, or, oh, well, I got sick from the vaccine. I took it and I felt bad for 3 days. But if you're in the hospital, a doctor looked at you and said, yes, you need to be in the hospital. Okay. So we're going to use hospitalization to hospitalization. And it's very simple. In Canada, right, they found that which has a national health system that collects this data really rigorously, because everyone has a single, like, national health file, and no matter where you live, right, you enter the Canadian health system. So the data is really good, and luckily Canada looks, in terms of socioeconomically, a lot like the United States. So for every 100,000 COVID vaccine doses that were administered, they got 11 people ended up in the hospital with some kind of side effect. Some of them were severe. Most of them were not, right? So of those 11 people, again, half of one would be, like, actually in a severe allergic reaction. So for every 200,000 people, you'd have one with a severe allergic reaction. In contrast, you know, early COVID, about 7,000 for every 100,000 people infected with COVID-19 were hospitalized. 7%. So I want to make it clear that if you had a city of 100,000 people and you just said, let COVID rip, just let it get after them, 7,000 of them would end up in the hospital. If you had another city of 100,000 people that you vaccinated every single one, you would see about 11 in a hospital. Okay? Data's locked in. Absolutely true. And the fact that the secretary, the Health of Human Services, cannot look at this data and simply state reality, can state a simple fact, which is, yes, like, one of them is clearly better than the other. And all of this, like treating fake bullshit and actual data as being like kind of the same, kind of both true. There's both sides. There's both sides to this debate. The problem that you end up with is that these people are setting policy. And one policy change that we've seen already has been that the COVID-19 vaccine has been restricted in the United States, something else that the secretary pretends isn't happening. But it's untrue, because in order to get vaccinated for COVID-19 booster, you now, if you're a healthy adult, have to go get a prescription from a physician, right? And it has to be off-label. The physician's not allowed to do it. And insurance companies, because it's now not recommended, it's now not in compliance with current guidelines, insurance companies won't pay for it. So you can't access it if you don't have money and you don't have a physician willing to prescribe it. And I am an example of this. I am a perfectly healthy adult. I have no comorbidities. But you know what I do have? A 2-month-old son who, as a parent, I would do anything to protect. Well, guess what anything entails? Anything involves me making sure I don't bring a deadly communicable disease home to my tiny, tiny son. So that meant I had to get boosted for COVID. Guess what? I did it. Nothing happened to me. And nothing happened to him, which is phenomenal because, again, when his grandparents came and visited him, they went back home, they got COVID. So, again, they recovered fine because they also got immunized. But most importantly, the most vulnerable person, the person we were all trying to protect, got to stay protected. The issue, again, is not that I'm like I think everyone should, unless your doctor tells you not to, then listen to your doctor. And I don't think the government should make it a legal requirement, right? Because I don't think governments should mandate anything unless it is absolutely crisis level. But then why, if it's a choice, why are you restricting who gets to make that choice? Why are you making it costly and difficult for some people to make the choice and easy for a subset of people to make the choice, particularly given the stats that we just saw? So you can see that there is just there is false belief layered on top of lies saying, oh, this isn't true. But you have to realize that at the core, there's just these actions here. And these actions, ultimately, my gripe is that they are curtailing freedom. I want the freedom to choose. I want the freedom to choose what's right for my family, period. And that's funny because when they weren't in charge of the CDC, the anti-vax crew, that's what they said they wanted. They said, we just want a choice. We just want the right to choose. And the pathetic part is the anti-vax nuts always had the right to choose, because at no point in the United States have more than 70% of the population been vaccinated. If 30% of people can do something, you can't really argue that it's like mandatory, okay? Like, if 30% of people didn't pay their taxes, we'd say in the US, paying your taxes is optional, okay? So the reason this is, I think, emblematic of the whole system, the whole way the Trump universe operates, which is misinformation, disinformation, some of which comes from a genuine place. I think maybe RFK really believes these things, right? Because he doesn't have the ability to discern data from anecdote. And he's doing exactly what he did with this study, where he draws a conclusion he wants and then he cherry picks data to find it. And then they layer on top of that a willingness to lie about what they're doing, about the actions they're taking. So they'll say things again, like Trump saying, I'm willing to confront Russia. I'm going to stop Russia. Putin respects me. Well, has Putin done any actions that align with fearing or respecting the president? No. He's continued his war of aggression in Ukraine unabated? And has Trump implemented any consequential actions onto the Russian state for ignoring him? No. So it's fair to say that Trump has a bunch of mis and disinformation that he bases it on, things like Zelensky is a dictator too, or Ukraine started the war. And then he layers on top of that lies, where he says things like, I'm doing my best, these guys, I'm delivering real consequences to Russia. And then he tries, the result is that not only can you not discern what is true, but you can't even discern what is the guiding principles at work here. And that is, you can't run a democracy that way, because voters have to live in the same reality. We have to be governed by the same set of data, by the same perception of true, right? And when you hide things about who's running the country, about why decisions are being made, about what is happening, then how can you vote on it? It'd be like, can you, if you and me are English speakers, can you vote meaningfully in an informed way in a Japanese election? No. Can you even name the parties? Can you even could you even understand a speech? No. So then why? All you have to go on is vibes, propaganda, nonsense, fiction. What candidate has better hair? And that's the goal of this. The goal of all of this is to reduce the information of the average voter down to nothing. Reduce the voter's ability to discern reality to as little as possible, so that when they can simply, whoever can shout their lie the loudest wins. And when you own social media and you control and coerce news outlets, there's nothing left. You can win. You can beat democracy. You can beat the game. You'll be the democratic speed runner. But I'm going to keep talking. I'm going to keep putting it out there as long as I can, as long as they'll let me. I have no sponsors, by the way, guys. The total number of sponsors this month, 0. If you want to help me out, I self-host combatvetnews.com, right? Literally because I was booted off Patreon once already. So that link's in the description. And I appreciate you guys for tuning in and joining me. Thanks. Okay, wait, I saw somebody dropped something. Hey, Andrew Bohr, thank you. The data's good on polio, MMR as well. Anti-vax doesn't care. Oh yeah, dude, there was so much compelling data for all of these claims. By the way, I don't know if you can see it here. I have like 15 tabs because I had to parse it down to be like, what is the core, what is like the core of the argument here? Right, there was all this stuff about autism and Tylenol, autism and MMR vaccines. It was absolutely like, there was just a fire hose of good data and like easily verifiable things that you could common sense, right? My favorite, for example, was when people were like, well, MMR vaccine causes autism. They said, great, well, let's look inside the data and find the exact year that the childhood MMR vaccine got implemented in different countries. Because if it were true, right, what would you see? You'd see the autism rate go through the roof. And you didn't. Just like I had a friend who told me, who was like, I think the COVID vaccine causes cancer. And I was like, cool, show me the study that made you think that. Well, he sent me a study that was like, cancer rates rising. But the study that the article was based on started in 2015 and ended in 2019. I was like, there was no COVID vaccine in this study. It predates it. And I was like, let's look up the most recent cancer rates. And the answer is nothing has changed. It's been stable. Right? Like, that's not, if something causes something else, then the introduction of that root cause will suddenly, immediately increase if you suddenly introduce it. Right? So these things are like verifiable, but you see how long it takes. It takes these conversations. It takes this discussion to do it. Yeah, science. Thank you, Andrew Borth. Exactly. Science is claim, evidence, caveat, and a hoax sounds like claim, repeat claim, non sequitur, and misdirection. It's true, right? Science is, here's the claim. here's the evidence supporting it, right? And if you are good, right, a good researcher is going to say, here are the caveats. Here's what we know, right? That's when people talk about things like confidence intervals and p-scores, right? One of my favorite things as a researcher, actually, I learned in undergrad and was really helpful anytime I did any kind of research in grad school, is there was a teacher who was like, listen, I authored this paper on particle physics. And he's like, we collected a lot of evidence for the existence of this particle. But he's like, none of the confidence intervals were sufficient, were strong enough for us to say that we had seen it, right? We were 87% sure that at least one of the detections we thought wasn't noise and was really there. But he's like, that's not enough to publish. So what we had to say is, all we could say is, here's the evidence that we saw one of these things. And here's how confident we are we saw this particle. And that's it. That's all you can say. And sometimes that's all you can say because that's all you can do to make a decision. And again, to bring the analogy back to national security, when Tulsi Gabbard has said that, there was a vast conspiracy by the intelligence establishment to manufacture evidence for Russian collusion. And they took this like thin evidence and they looked at it until they found Russian collusion or Russian interference. And the answer is no. They saw some evidence that Russia had systematically interfered in 2016. Then they tested it. They said, hey, I have a hypothesis that Russia interfered. Let's gather evidence for and against it. And then their analysts came out and said, here is what we believe occurred. And they found that some things, like the Steele dossier, were manufactured and not based in reality. But they're like, hey, there's actually a lot of stuff that says that this actually did happen. Here it all is. So people sit there and go, oh, well, like you do this method for vaccines, but you have to do it for everything. That's what the CIA analysts, the reason they're paid so much friggin' money is because they are as good at this as they are as a doctor is at researching vaccines. And so that's why I don't view these as being like separate stories, like off topic. It's on topic. It's exactly the topic. Because again, it's the same thing that we do on this channel. Look at how much of the time we spend trying to discern what is Vladimir Putin's intention. And if his intention was deterring NATO, then what would we see? We'd see that when Trump says Ukraine will never join NATO, that Putin's willingness to make peace would be greatly increased. But it hasn't, has it? If Vladimir Putin's intention was simply to protect Russian speakers, then he wouldn't want to bomb Kiev, right? Like it wouldn't make any sense. Or destroy whole towns as part of like a war of annihilation that's incompatible with its goals, right? So you have a hypothesis that you say, what evidence would appear if this hypothesis were correct? And what evidence will we see if the null hypothesis was true? And then you say, wow, look, here's the evidence. And this is it either supports the hypothesis or the null hypothesis. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think there's also a like meta crisis about people's inability to discern facts that we kind of talked about in the video. Anyway, I really got to go because it is like 1 o'clock. I'm so hungry. But I'm going to try to, anyway, I'm going to go. I'll tell you guys about the thing I did this weekend later. If you follow me on Instagram, you know. But I appreciate you.